Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most unsettling cases in Ozark history. Before we get started, I would like you to let me know where you are watching from and what time you are listening to this narration. We would also like to know what locations and times of day or night these documented accounts reach. What I'm about to share with you was pieced together from courthouse records, personal journals, and newspaper clippings from Taney County, Missouri. The majority of these materials were archived in 1967 after a mysteriously abandoned university research project. The original materials are said to have been damaged in a basement flood at the County Historical Society, and what's left are only fragmented and incomplete photocopies. The air in the Ozark Mountains carries stories, secrets buried beneath layers of pine needles and limestone. Some names have been changed or omitted in accordance with surviving family requests, but the events as recorded by multiple sources remain disturbingly consistent. This is the documented account of the Blackwood brothers and what actually happened in those woods in the fall of 1865, as the country was still reeling from the Civil War. Isaiah and Elijah Blackwood, identical twin brothers who had fought on the Union side despite the divided loyalties of their Missouri neighbors, believed that the forest was once a place of refuge when they returned from the war. According to their service records, they served in the 24th Missouri Infantry, but their commanding officer wrote in his field journal that they kept mostly to themselves, speaking only to each other in hushed tones that made the other men uneasy. It is interesting to note that the medical examiner's notes describe the brothers as unusually similar in physical aspect, sharing identical birthmarks on the right shoulder blade, which initially caused confusion as to whether the same man presented twice. The brothers had enlisted together in 1861, and military registration documents preserved in the National Archives show that their enlistment forms, filled out in nearly identical handwriting, list them both as 22 years old, with the notation woodsman under previous occupation. A handwritten note in the margin, presumably added by the county clerk, states, "Purchaser advised of local superstitions regarding said property." According to county records, the Blackwood family owned about 80 acres of heavily forested land about 7 miles northeast of Forsyth, which their father, Thomas Blackwood, had purchased in 1837. The land deed, which is preserved in the Taney County Archives, describes the property as remote and difficult terrain, suitable primarily for hunting and timber. The buyer doesn't care. The brothers returned to their family home in October 1865 to find it deserted. Their parents had died during the war. Their mother from unspecified causes 6 months later, and their father from pneumonia in 1862, according to church burial records at the First Baptist Church of Forsyth. It is interesting to note that, although Thomas Blackwood's cause of death was clearly recorded, Sarah Blackwood's entry simply reads, "Passed," with no further information, and the church registry notes that her burial service was held without a body present because remains were not recoverable. Following odd conduct, Blackwood's condition quickly worsened. She claimed to hear singing coming from the jungle and described nighttime visits. When neighbors noticed the house empty and worried about smoke coming from the chimney at odd hours, they learned that she had vanished. The tracks ended suddenly at Stone Creek after leading into the woodland. No other signs were discovered by search parties. In a November 1865 letter found among Mary's personal belongings after her death in 1912, the twins' only sister Mary wrote, "That place was never kind to us. The isolation changed Father. And what happened to Mother was never properly explained." Mary had married a Springfield shopkeeper and moved away prior to the war. A second letter, written in February 1866, shows Mary's mounting anxiety. "I received your reply and am troubled by your decision. Please leave that darkness behind. I'm really worried about the woman you mentioned, this stranger you've taken in. The person your mother claimed to see in her last months is too similar to your description. I beg you to keep in mind what happened to Mother. Something abnormal is present on the terrain." The brothers disregarded her request and instead withdrew farther into the forest, leaving the family cabin close to the edge of the property in favor of constructing a new building farther down the valley, almost 3 miles from the closest road. According to tax assessment records from 1866, There was a new dwelling constructed in remote section of property, accessible only by footpath. The assessor also made the personal observation that property owners appeared changed since prior meeting. To a disturbing extent, they are identical in speech and demeanor. Denied access to the new building for a thorough evaluation. A partial explanation for why 2 war veterans would choose such isolation can be found in Isaiah Blackwood's military medical records, which date from July 1864, show that he was briefly hospitalized after the Battle of Westport for nervous exhaustion and frequent nightmares. The attending physician wrote that Isaiah speaks of voices in the trees and insists something is following them home. 3 days later, a follow-up entry states that patient's twin brother arrived today. They were seen to communicate in a unique way, with extended silences during which they seemed to be speaking without using words. Both gave verbatim responses when asked about the patient's condition separately. Due to unit deployment, the request for extended observation was denied. They came together always, Morris wrote in an 1868 newspaper interview, never spoke to anyone but each other, paid in gold coins that seemed old, foreign-like. The twins would only come in to buy supplies every 2 or 3 months, according to statements made by Seth Morris, who ran the general store in Forsyth. Morris's testimony goes on to add, they stopped cutting their hair or beards and would just say, "We're not alone anymore," and give this strange, identical smile when asked about their welfare. You eventually lost the ability to distinguish between the two. There were moments when I thought I was seeing the same person twice, as if it were a mirror trick. The brothers' purchases over a period of months are documented in a ledger from Morris's store that has been preserved in the County Historical Society. The entries reveal an odd trend, increasing amounts of unusual items, large quantities of beeswax, silver wire, several bolts of fine fabric, women's hairpins, and perfumed soap. The last entry, dated January 1867, notes, customer requested unusual quantity of salt and iron nails. When asked, they responded, boundaries must be maintained. They were paid with a 1,783 Spanish gold coin. A hunting party looking for stranded survivors along Swan Creek, a tributary of the White River, reported hearing a woman singing coming from the direction of the Blackwood property. This detail appears in the journal of Reverend John Samuelson, who participated in the rescue effort, and describes how the strange events of spring 1867 caused unusual flooding in the Ozarks, including the washing away of several homes and the evacuation of low-lying areas. The Reverend wrote, "The voice was clear as church bells, singing a melody I did not recognize. The words sounded foreign, either Spanish or French. The song stopped suddenly when we shouted out." Later in the same journal, Samuelson wrote, Parker's hunting dog refused to proceed in the direction of the voice. We heard nothing but the rushing water and the wind through pine needles. The creature whimpered and cowed, acting in a way Parker said he had never seen it do before. After a while, the dog escaped back toward the town after escaping its lead. 2 days later, it was discovered weary and famished, as though it had been running non-stop. Concerned that someone might be stranded on the Blackwood property, the hunting party decided to investigate, and their findings were recorded in Reverend Samuelson's journal and later confirmed by sheriff's reports. The brothers' cabin stood in a small clearing, and unlike most frontier dwellings, it had been built with unusual care, with the logs uniformly cut and fitted together with precision. The most remarkable aspect, according to several accounts, was that the entire exterior had been covered with intricate carvings, symbols, patterns, and what seemed to be writing in an unidentified script. Several men made the sign of the cross, and Williams, our guide, refused to approach the structure, claiming the markings reminded him of something my Cherokee grandmother warned against. These symbols were carved into every inch of exposed wood, giving the impression that the cabin itself was watching us. More information is given in the report by Sheriff Thomas Winthry. The symbols seemed to form continuous lines that encircled the entire structure, with no clear beginning or end. Though they were warped in unsettling ways, several seemed to be versions of symbols used in astronomy or surveying. More unsettling was what they discovered around the cabin. Dozens of rudimentary effigies made from twisted branches, animal bones, and strips of cloth stood in concentric circles radiating outward. According to Sheriff Winthrop's official report, dated April 17, 1867, these constructions appeared to represent human figures in various postures of distress. Other effigies resembled no identifiable alphabet or numerical system. The article goes on to say, the figures were arranged precisely, each facing toward the cabin. Several of them contained personal items, buttons, hairpins, a child's shoe, origin unknown. There were 24 of these structures in the outermost circle, 16 inches the inner circle, 8 inches the inner circle, and 4 near to the cabin walls. The accuracy of the math points to intentional placement as opposed to haphazard design. The hunting party called for the Blackwood brothers, but got no answer, and after some discussion, 3 men, including the sheriff, entered the cabin. The interior was described as being well organized, but with some inexplicable elements, the most important of which was a room that seemed to have been prepared for a woman, with a bed made with clean linens, a dressing table with a silver-backed hairbrush, with long dark hair still tangled in the bristles, and several dresses carefully hung from wooden pegs. Both brothers had never married according to tax and census records, and the sheriff's report states, the women's clothing appears to be of unusual quality for this region. Silks and fine cotton with skilled embroidery work. The initials ELL are monogrammed on a number of things, yet no local seamstress can identify the stitching design. The most concerning was the discovery in the root cellar of the cabin. Sheriff Winthrop's report reports that they discovered a journal written in what appeared to be 2 nearly identical handwritings, alternating entries. Most of the text was unintelligible, either in code or, as Reverend Samuelson suggested, the result of deranged minds. The legible portions described how the brothers had discovered her on their return trip from the war and that they had brought her to their forest property, thinking she needed protection, after they found her wandering alone near the Missouri-Arkansas border, apparently disoriented and speaking a strange language. One entry, dated November 1865, states, "She speaks more clearly now, though her accent remains strange. She says she doesn't remember anything about her life before we found her. She smiles and responds that we can call her Eleanor when we inquire her name. When she believed we were asleep last night, we heard her singing to herself. There was no draft, yet the music caused the candle flames to curve in her direction. Eleanor explored the forest today," reads another passage that was presumably penned by the second brother. "She brought wildflowers that don't grow here with her when she got back. She was familiar with the names of trees I had never seen. Just beyond," she replied when I asked where she got these items. After this, the journal entries become more and more irregular, with references to her songs altering the trees and her nighttime walking that leaves no tracks by daylight. One note simply states, "We dreamed the same dream again. She was tying the branches of 2 old trees together in a braid. Soon you will understand the pattern," she remarked as she noticed us observing. We both woke up at precisely the same time and uttered her name. One entry that was especially upsetting explained how Eleanor asked us to carve the symbols she drew. Then, she says, "They will hold the limits in place. Our hands move as one, and we work in perfect harmony. I sometimes have trouble identifying which brother I am." The last readable entry, made only 3 weeks prior to the hunting party's discovery, stated, "We now understand. It seems less important every day. She never got lost. She waited. She has always owned the woodland. She asked yesterday if we would follow her further in, and we all said in unison, how could we say no? We are hers now too. Ever since we discovered her, she has been changing us." Or did she discover us? Like our reflections in motionless water, the distinction becomes hazy. Sheriff Winthrop's final report on the matter, dated June 1867, states that the only possible clue was the discovery of 2 identical sets of footprints leading away from the cabin toward the deeper forest. At the point where the tracks vanished, we found a woman's hairpin of silver design, twisted into a peculiar shape resembling the symbol carved repeatedly above the cabin's door. The brothers themselves were never found, and the hunting party searched the area thoroughly but found no trace of them. The sheriff's report ends, "It is the determination of this office that the Blackwood brothers have either fled the area or met with some misfortune in the remote regions of their property. The dogs refused to approach this item, growling and running away when brought near. Their writings' disturbed tone and the strange changes made to their home suggest that the psychological effects of war may have contributed to their decline and potential self-harm." Sheriff Winthrey took further actions after the investigation, according to a secret supplement to the report that was found during the 1967 research project. "Have conferred with Reverend Samuelson regarding the disposition of artifacts found at the Blackwood property. We both believe that some things should be kept private rather than open to the public, especially the journal and personal belongings from the woman's room. Until appropriate authorities can be consulted, these items are now locked in the church safe." According to church records, the First Baptist Church was mostly destroyed by fire in 1871, including the safe and its contents. The only artifact recovered from the debris was the silver hairpin discovered at the site of the disappearance, which was held by Reverend Samuelson's family until 1934, when it was given to the County Historical Society, and then lost due to a cataloging error in the 1,950 seconds. The case might have ended there, forgotten among the many tragedies of the post-war period, if not for the subsequent events that occurred in that same valley over the following decades. In 1879, a family named Harrington purchased the Blackwood property, apparently unaware of its history. County records show they intended to establish a small homestead for raising cattle. They cleared additional land and constructed a new home approximately a quarter-mile from the site of the original Blackwood cabin, which had by then fallen into disrepair. According to an article in the Springfield Republican, dated October 1880, the Harrington family abandoned the property after less than a year. Jacob Harrington refused to provide specific reasons to the newspaper, stating only that land don't want to be lived on. Local rumors, documented in several personal letters preserved in the County Historical Society, suggested that Mrs. Harrington had become convinced someone was singing outside their windows at night, and that their 7-year-old daughter had begun speaking with someone in the woods that no one else could see. Additional unsettling information can be found in a private letter written in August 1880 by Mrs. Catherine Harrington to her sister in Kentucky. "The singing now occurs every night. I know Jacob hears it, even though he says he doesn't. He has started drinking excessively, which he has never done previously. Their daughter Emma disappeared from her bed last night. At morning, we discovered her soundly dozing at the forest's edge. The woodland woman had shown her where the boys sleep, she claimed. She said, 'The ones who look the same.' When I inquired what brothers she meant, however, they are no longer the same. They're evolving into something different." The letter goes on. "Today, I discovered Emma's doll, the one her grandma had created for her. It was exactly like another doll I had never seen before, with its face meticulously altered with stitches. When I questioned Emma about it, she replied, 'Eleanor required 2 of them for her collection. We're heading off as soon as Jacob can make the deal. Some locations ought to stay unoccupied.' After a lumber company bought the property in 1897, it was abandoned for just 4 months. The company's records, which were discovered during the 1967 research project, contain a number of incident reports, including equipment failures, mysterious accidents, and several workers who refused to return to the site after claiming to have heard a woman's voice calling their names from among the trees. The foreman's daily logs show growing difficulties, including the following: April 18th, 1897. 3rd saw blade broken this week, even if the weather is mild. Metal exhibits odd stress patterns as if it were exposed to extremely cold temperatures. The 30th of April, 1897. Last night, 2 laborers did not return to camp. They both claimed to have been pursuing music when search parties discovered them roaming apart this morning. Both males seemed confused and unwilling to explain their nighttime movements. Both men's right shoulders have odd matching marks, according to a medical evaluation. Were stopped on the 7th of May, 1897, because of inexplicable technical malfunctions. Now, 6 men have asked to be reassigned. People continue to report hearing a woman's voice at night. From the edge of the woodland, 2 other guys claimed to have seen identical twin males observing the camp. The last entry, dated the 15th of May 1897, merely notes, "Operation terminated due to unsuitable conditions. Equipment to be relocated to Johnson property. Figures fled into trees when approached. Suggests that no logging attempts be made in this valley in the future." An inventory document that is attached to the company's records lists equipment that was left at the location as unsalvageable, including 6 saw blades that were described as twisted into monstrous pattern, cause unknown, and a logbook with entries that seem to have been repeatedly overwritten in various handwritings, making the text unreadable. The most specific evidence is found in the Journal of Dr. William Parsons, a Springfield physician who became interested in the Blackwood case in 1902. His extensive notes, which are preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, describe his investigations into what locals had started to refer to as the Singing Forest. Dr. Parsons interviewed a number of elderly residents who remembered the Blackwood brothers, and one of them, Margaret Wilson, who was 78 at the time, provides a different account of the twins' return from war. "They weren't alone," Wilson insisted. "There was a woman with them, though they acted as if she wasn't there. She was never introduced to us, and we never spoke to her." Tall, with dark hair that reached her waist, and eyes that appeared to change color in the light, she was strangely attractive. She refused to dine with us, and instead hummed softly while standing by the window. The oddest thing was how the brothers kept watching her, like they were afraid she'd disappear, Wilson adds. "My father later said he thought she might be Indian, maybe Cherokee, but she didn't look like any native folk I'd ever seen." They departed before daybreak. Wilson included a detail that Parsons thought was especially important. "My younger brother said he saw them walking down the road, the woman in front, the brothers following several paces behind, like they were being pulled by invisible strings." Wilson also mentioned that occasionally, when he looked quickly, he could only see one brother, not 2. However, he would blink, and 2 would appear once again. He was reprimanded for fabricating stories after telling our father this. Having failed to find this enigmatic woman or any evidence of her existence, Dr. Parsons turned to James Cooper, a former Confederate soldier who claimed to have met the Blackwood brothers during a skirmish near the Arkansas border in late 1864, whose account, as recorded by Parsons, describes an odd incident. "It was dawn, fog lying heavy on the field. Census records from nearby counties revealed no unaccounted-for women that fit her description, and military records made no mention of a female companion traveling with the Blackwood brothers during their return from service. As we were fleeing, I lost contact with my unit. I spotted the twins, Union boys, standing over something at that point. They failed to notice me," Cooper went on. "They were too preoccupied with what they had discovered." It appeared to be an old burial mound, similar to the Indian mounds that are seen all across the region. However, it had lately been disturbed, either intentionally or by shells. A woman was being assisted by the twins in climbing out of what appeared to be a hole in the mound. Her attire was not contemporary, and unlike anything I had ever seen. She walked in an odd way, as if she were relearning how to walk. I left without seeing more. I was more afraid of the scene than I was of any conflict. When the doctor visited the Blackwood cabin's original location in the summer of 1903, his investigation took a more unsettling turn. By that time, the building had completely collapsed, leaving only a foundation and a few rotting logs, but Parsons noted in his journal that the carvings remained visible on many of the fallen logs, remarkably preserved despite exposure to the elements. Parsons noticed something odd about the forest around the cabin site. The trees grow in an unnatural pattern here, forming almost perfect concentric circles around the cabin foundation. He sent rubbings of several to Professor Thornton at the university for investigation. According to local botany, these trees are no older than 30 years. However, their placement suggests that the wooden effigies were intentionally planted where they originally were. Even more intriguing, each tree seems to have become twisted, with trunks spiraling clockwise in the outer rings and counterclockwise in the inner rings. Throughout his 3-day exploration of the site, Parsons reported a recurring sense of being watched, noting on the second night that he was awakened at approximately 3 a.m. by a woman's voice, distant but distinct, that sounded like singing. Unlike any folk song I've heard, the tune was eerie. After maybe a quarter of a mile of following the sound, I realized I was lost in the darkness. When I eventually made it back to my camp, I found that my compass was broken. He wrote in his notebook the next morning, I discovered footprints around my tent this morning. The needle spins non-stop, finding no true north. 2 pairs of bare feet that are the same size and have the same gait. They lead off in the direction of the deeper forest after making a full circle around the tent. The fact that the ground was soft from recent rain is the most unsettling. His last post, dated the 17th of July 1903, states, I have found what appears to be a trail of recently broken branches leading deeper into the valley, but the prints showed no signs of weight depression, as if whatever made them had no substance. The trail appears to be intentionally marked. It is too regular to be the result of animal activity. After breakfast, I plan to follow it and see where it takes me. I can't get rid of the impression that I'm being welcomed there. Heard the singing again, considerably closer now, says a hastily written addendum at the bottom of the page. I caught a glimpse of a woman in white going between the gaps in the trees, but she was gone as I blinked. What's worse is that I've finally seen the brothers. They observe from the edge of the woodland. Their traits have not changed over time, and they look just as they are depicted in historical records. They precisely follow each other's movements, as they retreat in perfect synchronization when I call out. I now see that this is something much more remarkable than local folklore. I have to record what's taking place here. When Dr. Parsons did not return to Springfield 3 days later, he was reported missing. A search party discovered his campsite undisturbed, with all of his belongings except for his journal, the last pages of which had been torn out, and the clothes he had been wearing. The Taney County Sheriff's report concluded that Dr. Parsons had most likely fallen into one of the many sinkholes or caves that dot the Ozark region, but no trace of him was ever found. The case was officially closed in September 1903, but a note in the report's margin, written in a different hand, reads simply, "Third disappearance connected to Blackwood property. A pattern is beginning to emerge." Although it was not included in official reports, Daniels Hayward, one of the search party members, subsequently wrote in a letter to his brother in August 1903 that he had discovered something important during the search. We found a clearing unlike any I've seen in these woods. A perfect circle with no growth that is maybe 30 feet across. A man's fountain pen, likely belonging to the missing doctor, was discovered at the base of this strange tree. Most concerning was the finding that the bare soil in this circle contained an unusual substance, a fine white powder that several men identified as lime, which is frequently used in burial preparation. In the center stood 2 tree saplings planted so closely together that they had grown intertwined, forming a single twisted trunk that split again into 2 identical tops. The land was left vacant for decades before being included in the Mark Twain National Forest in the 1930 seconds. According to Forest Service records from that time period, rangers working in that sector filed a number of incident reports. One of these reports, dated August 1938, describes how Ranger James Cooper got lost from his partner while on a routine patrol and was discovered 3 days later, severely dehydrated and confused. The medical evaluation states that Cooper repeatedly mentioned a woman singing and insisted that the Blackwood brothers are still walking in those woods. Cooper's official statement, taken after his recovery, gives this account. "We were marking boundaries near the old Blackwood property when we heard music, like someone singing, but no words I could make out. Evans, my partner, claimed he was unable to hear anything. Evans kept working as I went to look into it." Cooper goes on to say, "I lost track of time as the sound seemed to move, leading me deeper into the valley. Even when it grew dark, I continued to follow the voice. There were times when I believed I saw a woman in white up ahead. Even though I've been patrolling this area for 3 years, I eventually came to a clearing I had never seen before. The oddest tree I've ever seen stood in the middle. It had 2 trunks that grew together before splitting apart at the top. Then I spotted them, 2 men standing on either side of the tree. Just same. The fabric appeared new, but their clothing was outdated, as if it had been made a century ago. They moved in perfect synchrony, as though they were connected, and their faces were unnaturally alike. Cooper's explanation of what transpired next was the most unsettling aspect of his statement. They both spoke to me at precisely the same moment and in the same voice. "Do you hear her too?" they asked. They then pointed behind me with matching smiles, saying, "That means you're part of the pattern now." When I looked around, nothing was there. The men were gone when I turned around. The following 2 days were spent attempting to escape the forest, but routes that ought to have been known turned out to be fruitless. Immediately after this incident, Cooper asked to be transferred to a different district, and his request was approved. According to a supervisor's notation in his personnel file, Ranger Cooper was once dependable. The incident has troubled him. Reassignment to tourist-centered tasks instead of solo patrols is advised after medical leave. Professor Alan Thornton, who had found references to the Blackwood incident in his grandfather's papers, the same Professor Thornton who had received Dr. Parsons' rubbings decades earlier, led a research team into the area in 1967 to document local folklore, and his notes reveal a personal connection to the case. My grandfather's analysis of the symbols from the Blackwood cabin was never published. This was the most thorough investigation of the Blackwood case. He became more and more fixated on the meaning of the rubbings when Dr. Parsons gave them to him in 1903. In contrast to any known mathematical or geographical system, he thought the symbols indicated some sort of boundary notation, as evidenced by his private documents. He asserted that rather than showing actual places, they showed changes between states of reality. The 200-page report, Patterns of Belief and Incident in Ozark Isolation Communities, 1,865 to 1,925, which was never published, was the result of the team's 6-week stay in the area gathering oral histories and looking for physical evidence. University records indicate that the research was stopped because of financial limitations and methodological issues, but notes from one team member, graduate student Elizabeth Chen, who donated her personal journal to the university archive after her death in 1982, reveal that the team encountered a series of unexplained incidents during their stay, including equipment malfunctions, team members who became inexplicably lost in familiar surroundings, and recordings that captured unexplained sounds. Chen wrote, "We've all heard it now, the singing. It always comes from a different direction and arrives shortly before dawn. According to Professor Thornton, it's a kind of collective suggestion and a psychological reaction to the stories we've been gathering. However, I taped it last night. Instead of singing, we heard what sounded like 2 men talking simultaneously as I played the tape again this morning. They repeatedly said, 'She is still waiting.' We found it exactly as described in Ranger Cooper's 1938 report, 'A perfect circle where nothing grows,' writes Chen in his journal, describing the team's finding of what seemed to be the circular clearing mentioned in historical reports. The remarkable doubletree, now fully grown, stands in the center. Up to almost 7 feet, the stems had fully entwined before splitting into 2 similar canopies. Her entry from June 12, 1967, details a troubling incident. Davis and Miller were mapping the clearing today when they both reported seeing someone watching them from the trees, a woman in white clothing. Professor Thornton estimates the tree's age at around 102 years, placing its origin shortly after the Blackwood brothers' disappearance. She withdrew more into the forest as they got closer. After a few hundred yards of following, they realized they had somehow turned around. Even though the clearing is less than half a mile away, it took them 3 hours to make their way back to camp. The research team's work was abruptly stopped after an incident at the original Blackwood cabin site, according to Chen's journal, where they were collecting soil samples when they discovered what appeared to be a small tin box with 2 identical military identification tags belonging to the Blackwood brothers and a silver locket with a braided lock of hair. "The strange thing," Chen wrote, "is that these items looked new. There was no tarnish or corrosion, as though they had just been put there, not a century ago." The locket featured the following inscription on the inside, ELL. When it was opened, it showed a tightly braided lock of hair, that combined strands of 3 different colors, 2 identical shades of brown, and a strand of black hair. Chen wrote that 3 team members saw a woman standing at the edge of their camp that night, though they each gave a different description of her. The most consistent detail was that she appeared to be singing, though no sound was audible. Miller described her as young, possibly 20. According to Davis, she was in her middle years. She was old, Professor Thornton insisted. The following morning, however, the team left. Chen's last entry states, "Professor Thornton has gathered all of our materials, notes, recordings, photos, and artifacts. According to him, the university needs to properly classify everything. However, this morning I caught him talking to Sheriff Davies. It has to do with respect for the deceased and national forest legislation. I doubt our results will ever be published." Chen added a personal observation. "I went back to the clearing with the odd tree for a short while before we departed. I wanted one last picture. Later, when I processed the film, I saw 2 figures standing side by side, observing, somewhat obscured by the typical trees at the edge of the clearing. Their size and stance seem the same, yet their features are blurry when magnified. The most unsettling aspect is that, despite the poor image quality, they appear to be dressed in Union Army uniforms. Although Thornton's team's materials were archived at the University of Missouri, access was restricted until 1987, when the majority of the materials were made available to researchers. Some important items, such as the recordings, the identification tags, and the locket, were listed as misplaced during archival reorganization. An administrative memo from the university dated October 1968 mentions a decision to place materials collected by the Thornton Ozark expedition under restricted access, stating, "Given the unusual nature of these items and Professor Thornton's concerning behavior after the expedition, appropriate measures have been taken. In particular, the recorded materials must be kept safe. Medical records show that Professor Thornton was hospitalized for 6 weeks after the expedition, diagnosed with acute stress reaction with paranoid features." According to the attending physician's notes, Thornton repeatedly expresses concern about boundaries weakening and patterns repeating. Therefore, the request for medical leave made by Professor Thornton is hereby granted. Even though his room is on the 3rd floor, the patient says he hears singing at night and sees identical twin guys watching him through the window. The last recorded incident related to the Blackwood case happened in 1968, when Forest Ranger Thomas Blackwell, who is not related to the Blackwood brothers, filed an unusual report after conducting a routine patrol in the Blackwood area and discovering what he believed to be new footprints of 2 men walking side by side in a remote area of the forest. The tracks led him to a small clearing where he found a makeshift shelter made of branches and leaves, and inside the shelter, Ranger Blackwell reported finding a handwritten note pinned to a tree with what appeared to be an antique military knife. The note allegedly read, "She sings the forest into different shapes. Through the ages, we follow her voice. Go back, whoever discovers this." According to Blackwell's investigation, the shelter contained personal effects that appear inconsistent with modern camping equipment. She gathers those who hear her. Items discovered were a woman's hairpin with a unique shape, 2 identical ceramic cups without a manufacturer's stamp, and a military canteen with a Civil War-era design. The finding of a journal with entries from 1865 to 1967 that were all written in what handwriting experts later determined to be 2 nearly identical hands, alternating entries, was the most worrisome. The journal was submitted with Blackwell's report, and only 3 pages of it are still in the Forest Service archives. The other pages were removed for undisclosed reasons. And the fragmentary entries on the remaining pages read, June 14th, 1923. We saw the doctor again today. He no longer knows his name or his mission, but he still follows her voice. He will soon follow the pattern, according to Eleanor. Like everyone else who hears her song, we keep changing. There are days when I can't remember whose brother I was. With every season that goes by, it becomes less important. The 30th of October 1951. Where she walks, the lines become less distinct. Within her circles, the forest recalls in a different way. We saw nothing today. although we did witness a lost hunter pass within 10 feet of us. Eleanor claims that the true nature of the forest can only be understood by those who hear her song. We're starting to resemble her, present but invisible, to everyone but her chosen ones. The 3rd of April 1967. Scientists arrive. People in town are questioned by them, gather tales, make measurements. Eleanor wants to know more about them. At night, she tests each one while standing at the edge of their camp. She is visible to 3, yet their perceptions vary. One of them, she claims, is descended from the ancient professor who examined the symbols. The motif is repeated. We've planned a present for them to discover. No follow-up report was ever filed, but Blackwell's report states that he collected the journal as evidence and planned to return with more rangers to investigate further. According to Forest Service personnel records, Blackwell asked to be transferred to another district the following week, and his request was granted. In 1985, when interviewed by a journalist who was looking into disappearances in national parks, Blackwell refused to go into detail about the incident, saying only, "Some places in those woods don't appear on any map, and that's probably for the best." Blackwell continued, "The brothers aren't missing, and neither is the woman. What I found there, what I saw later, isn't something that fits into normal reality. They're still there. But the forest around them isn't the same forest we travel through." Blackwell also adds in the journalist's notes, which were published in a regional magazine in 1986. "I dreamed about them for weeks after completing my report. The woman sings in between the twins standing on either side of a bent tree. I also began to hear her when I was awake, particularly in the morning. I asked for a transfer at that point. Not all songs are intended for us to follow." Now, a wilderness area in Mark Twain National Forest, the site of the Blackwood Cabin is purposefully avoided by official hiking trails, but no official restriction forbids access. Forest Service maps show the area with the usual notation for challenging terrain, but local guides routinely decline to lead groups there, and, little known, an internal Forest Service memo from 1972 creates an unofficial policy about the area. Rangers are advised to conduct patrols of Sector 7B, former Blackwood property, in pairs only. The location should be monitored annually, but no permanent equipment or signs should be put in place. In the past, every attempt to install automated wildlife cameras in this industry has failed within 48 hours of installation. In accordance with USFS policy on possible mass hysteria, reports of odd aural phenomena should be recorded but not made public. According to a 1976 supplemental note, the circular clearing and unusual twin-trunk tree are to be considered natural phenomena. Rangers who see any more structures in this region should note where they are, but refrain from conducting an unsupported investigation. Personnel should never follow voices or sounds that don't make sense, especially when a woman is singing. Rangers who report having visual contact with people who fit the Blackwood brothers' historical descriptions should be relocated right away while they undergo psychiatric testing. There are times when hikers claim to hear singing in that area of the forest, especially early in the morning or shortly after sunset. Those who know the history of the area call it her forest, or occasionally the brothers' path. Parents in neighboring communities continue to caution children against following strange melodies heard among marist. The trees. A 1992 survey conducted by the University of Missouri's Folklore Department recorded 47 different reports of encounters with what locals call Hikar, the singing woman, or Nar. The Blackwood twins. The descriptions of these encounters are remarkably consistent, even though the witnesses were unaware of previous reports, noting certain trends. Most occur at dawn or dusk, with a smaller number reported during full moons. 2. The lady is usually spotted first, but she is frequently partially hidden by mist or foliage. 3. The twins are typically seen standing motionless at a distance, dressed in old-fashioned but in perfect condition attire. 4. Witnesses claim to have heard singing prior to the visual encounter in 78% of cases, though the tune is characterized in a variety of ways. 5. A number of witnesses mention an odd time distortion, with seemingly short contacts turning into hours-long ones. Among those who reported these encounters, 17 underwent significant life changes in the months that followed. 8 changed their professions. 5 moved to new cities. 4 started creative projects they couldn't explain how they came up with them, and 2 eventually returned to the forest and were never seen again. 6. Almost all witnesses experienced disorientation after the encounter, with 62% needing assistance to find their way out of the forest. Harold Jenkins, a 2-year-old Taney County native, made the most recent recorded statement in 1966 while participating in a local history project. When questioned about the Blackwood brothers, Jenkins became visibly uneasy and, after he hesitated for a while, related a story his grandfather, who had been a member of the first search party in 1867, had told him. "My grandpa said they didn't tell everything in the official reports," Jenkins said, "and what they found in that cabin was worse than they let on." Jenkins went on, "And that journal they found? There was a room with papers all over the walls, hundreds of drawings of the same woman's face over and over again, but with slight variations, as if they were trying to get some detail just right. According to Grandpa, there were pages with what appeared to be 2 distinct accounts of the same incident written side by side, as though each brother was having a unique experience of the same moments. The handwriting started to converge into a single style in the later entries. What Jenkins's grandfather said he found in the cabin's attic was the most unsettling part of his story. Her grandpa told me they discovered a map drawn on deerskin showing the valley, but with all the landmarks in wrong positions. Backward, the river flowed. Where valleys should have been, there were hills. Jenkins's last remark was possibly the most terrifying. Grandpa told me that for years after, people would occasionally spot the brothers in the forest, and throughout the map, small figures had been drawn, pairs of identical men standing in various locations, all facing toward a central point marked with a symbol no one recognized. Always together, always at a distance. They would be spotted strolling among the trees, pursuing an obscure object or person. Almost 50 years after their initial disappearance, the final sighting was recorded in 1914. They had not grown older. An unpublished appendix, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2008, contains this intriguing notation. Survey Area 17 coordinates redacted contains anomalous readings inconsistent with known geological formations. A team from Washington University's Department of Anthropology conducted 9 ground-penetrating radar surveys in the area in 1998, presumably as part of a larger study of pre-Columbian settlement patterns. Their published findings do not mention the Blackwood case, instead focusing on evidence of ancient habitation. What looks to be a circular building with a diameter of about 30 meters and extending at least 10 meters below the surface is detected by ground-penetrating radar. Dating isn't definitive. A pre-Columbian ceremonial site may have been suggested by the exact circularity, which points to artificial building. Unfavorable circumstances and equipment failures hindered further research. Although none of the team members claimed to have heard any strange noises during the survey, it is noteworthy that the audio recordings obtained during the study included unexplained acoustic artifacts, rhythmic patterns that resembled vocalization. The project's lead researcher, Dr. Marion Weber, declined all interviews and left the university the following year to take a job in New Zealand. In 2010, she was contacted via email and replied simply, "Some boundaries shouldn't be mapped, some songs shouldn't be recorded. Recommendation: additional investigation with improved equipment." No follow-up study was ever conducted. The Blackwood case remains officially classified as a historical disappearance, presumed to be the result of post-war psychological trauma and the harsh realities of frontier isolation. The various reports of singing, sightings, and disappearances over the decades are generally attributed to the growth of local folklore around a compelling mystery. Yet, to this day, forest rangers quietly advise visitors not to hike alone in certain sections of the Ozarks. Local residents still report occasional sightings of 2 identical men walking silently among distant trees. And sometimes, particularly after heavy rains when the White River rises, People still claim to hear a woman's voice singing in a language no one recognizes. In 2005, a digital audio recording made by campers captured what sound analysts described as two male voices speaking in perfect unison with identical acoustic patterns, impossible to achieve through normal human speech. The words themselves are difficult to discern, though some believe the phrase, "ours, she is remaking us all," can be heard. The location where the recording was made lies approximately 1 mile from the original Blackwood property. Route Trail 22 to avoid Blackwood Valley, scrawled by hand in the margin of a 1969 Forest Service internal letter about trail development, is the most recent evidence pertaining to the Blackwood case. The truth may never be known, but in the deeper reaches of the Ozarks, where shadows gather early and the wind through pine needles sounds almost like a woman's voice, the story of the Blackwood brothers and the mysterious woman they brought home from war continues to echo. Too many incidents. What really happened to the Blackwood brothers in those remote woods? Was their disappearance simply the sad conclusion of lives shattered by war? Or does something more inexplicable still wait in that isolated valley, singing softly among ancient trees? As recently as 2012, a hiker who had lost his way in an area close to the old Blackwood property claimed to have come across two identical men dressed in vintage clothing who led him back to a designated trail. The hiker said that the men spoke in perfect unison and appeared to shimmer slightly at the edges, like heat rising off summer asphalt. What was most unsettling was his observation that, in between blinks, he occasionally saw only one man, not two. Local folklore researchers have noticed an odd pattern. Reports of the singing woman and the identical brothers spike every few decades, then decline again, with the last such increase occurring in the late 1960s. If the pattern continues, we might be in for another round of encounters. On some nights, some locals still say, if you stand at the edge of the forest, near where the old Blackwood property used to be, you might hear faint singing. Those who have grown up with the legend say you should never, ever follow the voice or answer if it calls your name, because in those woods, identities blur like morning mist, and those who enter seeking answers may end up becoming part of the story, walking endlessly among the trees, following a melody that leads nowhere but deeper into her forest. In 1975, a surveyor updating property boundaries reported discovering an unusual tree in the valley, two separate trunks that had grown together, then separated again at the top. At the base of the tree, he found a small carved wooden box with two identical gold wedding bands inside. The inscription inside each ring was so worn that it was barely readable, but it seemed to read ELL, beginning and end, 1865. The surveyor submitted the rings along with his report. They were transferred to the County Historical Society, but disappeared from the collection by 1980. The last person to officially handle them was a graduate student cataloging artifacts. In her final project submission before leaving the program, she wrote, "So I sometimes dream of a woman singing in the woods. She is aware of my name,